The parts of the human brain can all be impacted by a traumatic brain injury. The effects of a TBI on various parts of the brain create a varied and complex picture of the possibilities and differences that an injury can have on the brain as a whole. For an educator, there are signs and symptoms present with injuries that affect these brain parts. As a result, educators need to be aware of the possible difficulties that students will have with the following problems, which are processing speed, memory, visual and spatial abilities affecting reading and writing, language acquisition, fatigue, and endurance as a student, and executive functioning and organizational skills that affect behavior, attention, and learning. A traumatic brain injury can impact the life of a typical person significantly so that he or she requires specific accommodations and assistance in order to function appropriately. The formal definition given by the Colorado Department of Education for a child who is deemed eligible for services because of a traumatic brain injury, as the manual states, is that the child is prevented from receiving reasonable educational benefit from general education as evidenced by one or more disabilities. It is important to note that a traumatic brain injury can cause direct problems with attention, memory, processing speed, physical activity, visual or auditory processing, acquisition of information, overall struggles with language skills, problems with behavioral regulation leading often to poor impulse control and judgment, and overall problems with academic skills. A student with damage to the cerebellum will demonstrate movements that are slow and uncoordinated and will therefore require physical accommodations on part of the school. The student can be prone to physical dangers because of his or her poor skills of walking and moving in general. Another consequence of a cerebellum injury can be slurred speech. The frontal lobe is usually referred to as the emotional control center and the home to our personality. MRIs have shown that the frontal area is the most common region of injury following mild or moderate traumatic brain injury. It is important to note that injuries to the frontal lobe have little impact on measuring IQ, but it does have an enormous impact on motor functions, problem solving, memory, use of language, personal judgment, impulse control, and social behaviors. Damage to the frontal lobe can also result in the loss of fine motor movements and overall lack of strength. Because a frontal lobe injury can show dramatic and unpredictable change in a child's social behaviors, a proposed accommodation for that child would be having a one-on-one aide in the classroom at all times. Occipital lobe is often referred to as the center of visual perception in the brain. When this lobe is not functioning as intended, a person is apt to see things that aren't really present, or to misinterpret what these things are. As I state in the presentation, the brain plays tricks that cause visual illusions and hallucinations. The parietal lobe is an area which controls sensations and perceptions. A person with an injury to this lobe might experience difficulties in understanding their own body image as well as the body image of others, and have overall difficulties with spatial relations. The difficulties, as noted, all come with noteworthy accommodations for a student in a classroom. Often teachers will find alternative strategies and learning techniques for these students who are experiencing difficulties in using the pencil to write, dealing with number facts with mathematics, understanding spelling rules with language, and with geometry having a clear understanding of shapes. It is noteworthy that the right side of the parietal lobe can cause difficulties with a person's ability to care for his or herself, and this would include the ability to dress and to wash when necessary. Students also show difficulties with making things with their hands, particularly in art class. An injury to the temporal lobe can cause major difficulties related to visual and auditory attention. The right side of the lobe is actually weak in recognizing various tones and sounds and can also result in poor visual memory and recall of faces and people in general. The temporal lobe is called the primary organizational area for sensory input. This means that a student would have problems recognizing words and pictures and placing them into categories. Students would need major accommodations with building formal language skills and assisting with memory and recall of both verbal and nonverbal material. The brainstem is a crucial area through which all information passes through and out of the brain. The brainstem has a vital role in brain activities that affect attention and understanding one's surroundings and one's inner personality. Damage to the brainstem can impact many of the mentioned regions of the brain depending on the extent of the injury. The following are suggested accommodations that are relevant to a variety of the deficits in student learning noted previously. Many of these accommodations are customary for each of the brain functioning problems that have been noted in the previous slides. One of the most important accommodations, in my opinion, is that students with brain functioning disabilities, at a minimum, receive extra time as well as preparation support in the context of tests, quizzes, papers, and assignments.